Today the topic is the geopolitics of anti-Semitism and more. Now the Middle East is important. It's really strategic real estate. Three continents come together there. There's a lot of oil, important trade routes. It's a way into Central Asia, and it's a protection of Central Asia, among other things. Israel is a country. It's a member of the community of nations. It has rights and duties like every other country does. Israel is an ally of the United States, and both countries have duties and obligations towards each other as part of that alliance or friendship. Now, Russia wants Israel weak, and Russia wants Israel isolated, and Russia wants to hurt and weaken U.S. alliances. We see that in Europe. They're trying to break up NATO, the EU, and such, and they want to break up the U.S.-Israeli alliance. So we're going to talk briefly about a couple of things. The first thing is that Russia is running information operations in Israel to divide Israel internally. The second thing we're going to talk about are the information operations being run by the Russians in the United States, and they're basically anti-Semitism. They're going to stress anti-Semitism in these information operations. Now, there are other information operations the Russians are running, but I want to talk about the geopolitical importance of anti-Semitism because they definitely play to that in this country. Okay, so let's talk about information operations within Israel. Okay, and so let's start with Daniel Rakov of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. He's a reserve Army lieutenant colonel in the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces. He wrote an article in April of 2024 called Russia's Interference in Israel's Internal Affairs. And he writes that since April of 2023, Russia has been running an interference campaign in Israel as part of its global influence network known as Doppelganger. Doppelganger's operators discussed the possibility of organizing a pro-Russian political party to run for the Knesset, exploiting local influencers and arranging provocations, which would be incendiary graffiti and flash mobs. And what folks need to know is that there are about 2 million Russian-speaking Israelis in Israel, which is around 15% of the population. So that's a very sizable group. It's a very sizable minority. And you don't need a lot of people. You need a cohesive minority if you want to establish a credible fifth column with some power. I mean, we see that in the Catholic Church, I believe, with the traditional Catholic communities and with traditional Latin Mass communities. I think these are basically a fifth column. Well, what you have in Israel is you have Doppelganger trying to weaponize this Russian-speaking group of Israelis and to use them to run for political offices and exert influence through influencers. So Rakov goes on and writes, the campaign seeks to deepen polarization in Israel and to advance Russian interests. You know, just like polarization in this country is largely a result of Russian operations. So the campaign seeks to deepen polarization in Israel to advance Russian interests, such as withholding military aid to Ukraine, distancing Israel from the United States, and getting Jerusalem to adopt a more positive attitude towards Moscow. The campaign also is aimed to influence American Jewry against the Democratic Party and in favor of the Republicans in a November 2024 election in the United States. So this was written about 6-7 months before the election. In Russia's view, supporters of the Israeli right-wing camp are more amenable to absorbing Moscow's manipulative messages to promote a change in the policy of the Israeli government. A senior Kremlin official is steering interference in Israel's internal affairs. President Vladimir Putin is probably at least vaguely aware of what's going on, according to Rakov. The establishment of an interference campaign in Israel illustrates the deterioration in relations between Moscow and Jerusalem, however, he notes. Russia increasingly sides with Israel's enemies. Doppelganger's campaign in Israel likely aims both to signal to Jerusalem that Moscow can harm it and to strengthen Russia's image of power in the world. Doppelganger reflects Moscow's cynical willingness to exploit divisions within Israel's domestic arena, undermine the foundations of Israel's political system and alliance with the U.S., and to promote Russian interests. So the Russians are working within Israel to divide Israel, to create conflict in Israel, like the Russians have created conflict in the United States, to weaken it, because Israel is obviously an enemy of Putin and Russia. Now, the second point I want to bring out as we talk about this interference in Israel and dividing of Israel by the Russians are some comments that Putin recently made in June of this year. As I mentioned before, there are about 2 million Russian-speaking Israelis, about 15% of the population if you do a quick search. A man by the name of Itamar Eichner on June 21st of this year wrote an article in ynetnews.com entitled Putin's Surprising Reason for Not Providing War Aid to Iran. Israel is almost a Russian-speaking country. I mean, this is Russian disinformation, right? But he's basing these comments, Putin and the author here of the article, basing these comments on a fact that there are about 2 million Russian-speaking Israelis. Okay, so in Eichmar's article, quoting from his article, here we go. Quote, Putin said on Friday during a news conference, this is in June, that the Kremlin traditionally enjoys good and friendly relations with the Arab world. It has been said that we must show a certain solidarity, and that is true. But in any case, every conflict is rather unique. I want to draw your attention to the fact that almost 2 million Russian-speaking people live in Israel. It is almost a Russian-speaking country today, end of quote. So right there you can see what Putin's thinking. He wants to divide the Israelis, and he's going to play the Russian language, the Russian ethnicity card, which he's done for a quarter of a century now. Wherever he goes, whatever little country, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's a Baltic state, whether it's Armenia or something in the Transcaucasus region, he is always trying to play the ethnic card. Okay, so he would like Israel to split and get away from the United States and go towards Russia. Okay, so that's a brief rundown of what's going on inside of Israel. And certainly, these tensions in Israel are being exacerbated by what's going on with Gaza. Okay, so the second thing I want to talk about is anti-Semitism, which is used for geopolitical goals, and it is especially being employed in America, because Putin and the Russians, they want to divide America on Israel. They want to weaken U.S. support for Israel. They want to weaken U.S. alliances, like I said. So we see this in a couple of articles that came out. One is from November of 2023 by Politico. Putin hijacks Israel-Gaza war to fuel tensions in the USA. The article says the Israeli-Hamas war has given Russia a golden opportunity to sow division among its Western enemies. Since the outbreak of hostilities on October 7th of 2023, Kremlin-linked Facebook accounts have ramped up their output by almost 400%. With the Middle East crisis now dominating posts from Russian diplomats, state-backed outlets, and Putin supporters in the West. The lies spread by Moscow's digital propagandists now include claims that Hamas terrorists are using NATO weapons. We heard that too in the Ukraine, right? In the Ukraine war, we heard Ukraine was all trained by NATO to go fight Russia, okay? To attack Israel. So Hamas terrorists are using NATO weapons to attack Israel, and that British instructors are training Hamas attackers. So this disinformation allows Russia to foment division in the West via targeted social media activity aimed at splitting those in support of Israel from those who back Palestine. Real-world violence, particularly against Jews, has spiked over the last 7 weeks. Anti-war protests by hundreds of thousands of people have sprouted up from London to Washington. Okay, so a Yahoo article from May of 2024 by Dan DeLuce is entitled, Russia is trying to exploit America's divisions over the war in Gaza. Russia is seeking to exploit America's divisive debate over Israel's offensive in Gaza through overt and covert propaganda, with the aim of aggravating political tensions in the U.S. and tarnishing Washington's global image, according to sources in U.S. intelligence familiar with the matter. In his ongoing information war, Deleuze writes, against the U.S., Russia has shifted its focus in recent months to the Israel-Hamas conflict, seeking to inflame existing divisions in the West and portray Washington as fueling the violence. The effort includes artificial intelligence, fake social media accounts, a long-standing tactic used by Moscow, as well as a spike in propaganda from Russian state media. The sources declined to share examples of Russian-generated bots on social media to avoid revealing U.S. intelligence gathering methods. Well, we have pretty good intelligence gathering methods, so we know what they're doing. In my own experience, I spent about 6 or 7 months or more on social media, just kind of watching the bots, the shills, the trolls, and you get to see the message that they're trying to put out. And so then you start to see what Putin wants you to believe, okay, and what the Russian disinformation campaign is. And there are many different themes, okay, but you can figure that out rather quickly. And what the Russians do with these social media campaigns, they're silencing dissent, okay? Not only are they telling you what to think, but they're silencing dissent. So if you think the Russians are some big, free speech advocate, think again. That's how they're going to silence people. They're going to do it through social media. And when they don't have social media, they're just going to tell you what to think. And if you don't think that, you're going to get punished. So Russia's about tyranny, just like China's about tyranny, and Iran's about tyranny, and North Korea, and a lot of other countries. Okay, so AI is being used, social media accounts are being used. The Russians have been using this for many years, and it's been hurting the United States. And a lot of people don't know this, and they don't believe it. But it's coming from Russia, and it's got a geopolitical purpose, and that is to weaken the United States. So U.S. pulls out, weaken our alliances, so we abandon our friends, and Russia can move out, advance into the world. Okay, the free press. Now one example here that I'm going to talk about is the crisis in Gaza with food. I think everybody recognizes that there is suffering in Gaza. Nobody is saying there isn't. But what's happening is there are certain instances that are exploited, certain lies that are told to inflame the situation. What I'm going to tell you is one of these lies, one of these situations that is used to inflame the situation and turn people against Israel and against the United States. Okay, so the Free Press on July 28th writes an article. There's an article in Free Press, July 28th. Is Gaza starving? Searching for truth in an information war. That's the title of the article. So, quote, if you spent any time on social media this weekend, there's a good chance you saw it. A haunting image of a mother in a hijab holding a skeletal child, an 18-month-old boy wearing only a diaper. And it's heart-rending. I've seen this. I mean, this breaks your heart. Okay, often this image was accompanied side by side with a black and white photograph of a Jewish child on the brink of death in one of Hitler's death camps. I mean, it was very powerful. I saw this, and I'm sure many of you did too. The intended message was clear. This Palestinian boy is a symbol for the mass starvation gripping the 2 million people of Gaza. The blame lies with Israel. Indeed, the Jews themselves are perpetrating the very crime against humanity that they suffered in our lifetimes. The article goes on and says, but the boy in the picture, Muhammad al-Matuk, who appeared to be on the front page of Britain's Daily Express, and then a couple days later on the front page of the New York Times, was picked up by the BBC, CNN, Sky News, and a lot of other media outlets. He, in fact, suffers from a muscle disorder and other grave genetic conditions unrelated to starvation. That's according to David Collier and CNN. And they note that if you look at the mother and if you look at the child next to the mother, they actually look well fed. So this is an example of disinformation. And when you see photos of Hamas, I mean, they're well fed. So there's some issues, there with food, they're being worked on. But what the article touches on is a favorite weapon used by the Russians to divide Americans. And it's hatred of Jews. It's very simple. They are stoking the fires. The Russians are stoking the fires of anti-Semitism, hatred of Jews. And Putin himself engages in this. Because we know from an article by Alexander Smith that was published on the NBC website March 9th, 2018, entitled Putin on U.S. Election Interference. I couldn't care less. Of course, that's a lie. I mean, Putin just lies all the time. Who does he remind you of? But he lies all the time, all right? Yeah, he reminds us of a leader here in the United States. Okay. Putin, so here's the article. Putin suggested that Jews or other ethnic groups have been involved in the meddling in the U.S. election from 2016. Maybe they're not even Russians, he said. Maybe they're Ukrainians, Tatars, Jews, just with the Russian citizenship. Even that needs to be checked. Maybe they have dual citizenship, or maybe a green card. Maybe it was the Americans who paid them for their work. How do you know? I don't know. That's what Putin says. So, asked whether he was concerned about Russian citizens attacking the U.S. democracy, Putin replied he had yet to see any evidence that the alleged interference had broken Russian law. So this shows that Putin's a liar because it's very well documented the Russians interfered with our election. That's the Comey report of 2019. That's the Senate Intelligence Committee report signed off on by Marco Rubio, and there's just a number of other private sources. There's even a series being run right now by a couple of journalists about the 2016 election. You just Google it and you'll find it because the Russians did interfere. They interfered in social media, and they did. The Russians did talk to Trump's campaign. There's no doubt. But like I've said before, there was insufficient evidence to charge anyone criminally with election interference, though I think 12 or 13 Russians were charged with other crimes as a result of the Mueller investigation. But this shows Putin's willingness to sow Jewish hatred or hatred of Jews and anti-Semitism. And guess what? Some conservative chatters want to jump right on that bandwagon. And a lot of Catholic chatters are jumping on that bandwagon. You know? A lot of traditional Catholics or Catholics who claim they are presenting traditional Catholic teaching, and a lot of Catholics who are traditional Latin Mass Catholics are engaged in anti-Semitism. They're engaged in spreading Jew hatred. And that's the reality. Why do they do it? Well, it's fame and fortune. That's a big reason that they do it. It's for fame and fortune. A while back, I knew a chatter. I don't deal with them anymore. But this chatter wasn't doing so well, and he met David Duke, and David Duke said, "Hey, if you write and talk about Jews, you're going to always have a following. You're going to do well." So that's what this guy did. He just doubled down, and he got a following because the Russians, on social media, they want to promote that. They want to promote hatred of Jews. Now, a lot of the people who engage in this, too, are just anti-American. They just not only want fame and fortune, but they're also anti-American. Their position that they take is really this. It's really, it's wrong, obviously. But basically, their position is Jews are inherently evil. Number two, the Jews are responsible for all the evil or the evil of the day. And then number three, they claim their position is somehow Catholic. It's justified somehow in tradition. So what they're doing is they are legitimating, they're authorizing, they're justifying, they're facilitating a dislike of Jews and a hatred of Jews. Though they claim, they don't hate Jews, that's what they always say. But what they're doing is they're giving people somebody to dislike and to hate, okay, and to cast as the scapegoat. Fundamentally, they are anti-Catholic. What these people are doing, and I think they should be. I condemn them. They should be suppressed. They're leading a lot of people to error. They're leading a lot of people to perdition. They're stoking the fires of hatred. When you stoke the fires of hatred, what happens is you're blinded, and so you're easily manipulated. You miss other things, and you're blinded. So let's read Nostra Aetate. It says, in her rejection of every persecution against any man, the church, mindful of the patrimony she shares with the Jews, and moved not by political reasons, but by the gospel's spiritual love, decries hatred, persecutions, displays of anti-Semitism, directed against Jews at any time and by anyone. Besides, as the church has always held and holds now, Christ underwent his passion and death freely because of the sins of men and out of the infinite love in order that they may reach salvation. The Catechism goes on to say in section 2303, deliberate hatred is contrary to charity. Hatred of the neighbor is a sin when one deliberately wishes him evil. Hatred of the neighbor is a grave sin when one deliberately desires him grave harm. End of quote. So, you know, what Catholics should be doing is building bridges, which would Leo XIV has mentioned from the beginning. We should be building friendship with people and not accusing them, not blaming them, not especially basically claiming something is inherent and they're responsible for all this evil, whether it's the evil of the day or all the evil of all history. So it really is something to see. People of faith, Catholics, who are just, or people who say they're of faith, Catholics, to really attack other people because of who they are. Okay, so Candace Owens is a big promoter of, big stoker of anti-Jewish sentiment. There's, no doubt of that in my view. A couple times I've seen her, she just wants to encourage that. So that makes her a Russian asset. Now, that doesn't mean she's a Russian agent. She may not be getting paid by the Russian, but she's a Russian asset. She can be used to advance Russian interests. And what they do, and what happens is these people want to build followings, like Candace and others, though she's got a lot of followers. These people want to build followings, so they get on social media, and they're going to say stuff that's going to attract the bots and attract the likes. And that's going to fuel their ego, and they're going to want to say more and more. And so that's one way in which they are controlled. So let's talk about Candace Owens. So let's go back to a timeline. It's going to involve a lot of things. June 2016. What this timeline is going to show, it's going to show an overlap or a confluence of opportunities for Owens and others to work with the Russians. It's going to show a confluence or an overlap of interests of these people with the Russian interests to try to create division in society by playing to certain themes. And some of those themes, on their face, they look great. But the reality is they hide a darker reality because these themes, like traditional values, and are used to divide, and the differences are amplified by the Russian social media operations, AI operations, and they're amplified by some of these chatters like Candace Owens. And instead of trying to build friendship in society, these people like Candace Owens and other chatters are dividing. They're creating hatred and anger towards other people. Okay, so June of 2016, Brexit occurred. Robert Mercer was a big supporter of Brexit. Okay, he's a big Trump supporter, big conservative, hedge fund manager, big AI researcher. He had Renaissance Technologies. He assisted in the effort to get the British to leave the European Union. August 2016, Rebecca Mercer, who is Robert Mercer's daughter and shares his same beliefs, gets Trump to hire Steve Bannon as campaign manager, because by that time Paul Manafort was falling apart as Trump's campaign manager. Bannon, who's again traditional Latin Mass Catholic, just recently I saw a post linking him with the traditional Catholic movement, traditional Latin Mass Catholic movement. He's definitely pro-Russian, definitely anti-American, former Breitbart editor. He's constantly attacking America and our alliances. He's constantly attacking American elites. Steve Bannon's a bad guy. Okay, he becomes Trump's campaign manager, and Trump wins in November 2016. Okay, summer of 2018, Rebecca Mercer helps found Parler. Okay, it's a free speech platform that ultimately dispenses toxic, caustic disinformation narratives. Okay, about the same time, Candace Owens endorses Parler. At the same time, Candace Owens is involved with Turning Point USA and other conservative causes, and she meets a guy called George Farmer, who's a Britishman, an Englishman, a British man, an Englishman, okay, a Brit. August 2019, Candace Owens marries George Farmer, who's another conservative. You know, they share beliefs, ideology, if you will. Now, George is the son of Lord Michael Farmer, or Mr. Copper. Mr. Copper is conservative Brexit, and it's from a number of different articles. This one's from Reuters, but there are others. He's conservative Brexit, hedge fund manager. He promoted Brexit. He's conservative, promoted Brexit. He's a hedge fund manager, and he's been a commodities trader for a lot of years. That's important. According to Mr. Copper's website, or Lord Farmer's website, quote, he has spent his entire career in the city of London, apart from a couple of secondments, the first to Frankfurt in what was then West Germany, and the second to New York. Known as Mr. Copper, he was highly influential in the world copper market and the largest merchant trader from the 1970s to the recent past, frequently accounting for between 15 and 20% of Chinese copper imports. As the LME is the global pricing mechanism for base metals, he had trading relationships. I don't know what LME means. He had trading relationships, but it's the global pricing mechanism. He had trading relationships with many countries, particularly prior to 1990 with the Soviet Union, and, as mentioned, with China. Therefore, he had to cultivate the skills to be able to negotiate many different cultures. He also was well accustomed to navigating the ethical maze of global trading. His financial support for the Conservative Party began when there was an explicit commitment to a social justice agenda in general and a strengthening families agenda in particular. Okay. Now, strengthening families is fine, but what happened is strengthening families is being weaponized to divide people. Okay. It's not supposed to do that. Okay, so let's go back. Prior to 1990, so let's see. He had trading relations with many countries, particularly prior to 1990 with the Soviet Union, particularly with the Soviet Union. Okay, the 1980s. So what was going on in the 1980s? If you read Putin's People by Catherine Belton, the Russian communist elites figured out that the Soviet Union was doomed. Okay, now some people say that was a deception, but Belton says the Russians knew. Russian communists knew that the Soviet Union was doomed, and that they knew that because of their KGB agents overseas dealing with various economic subversion, economic espionage, economic issues. They saw Russia just simply, or Soviet Union, simply could not compete with the West. So, as Belton explains, and she has her sources, the Soviet communists started getting money out of the country. And one way to do that was through commodities. They could mine the commodities real cheap and then go out and sell them for a lot more money and then take the money and recycle it somewhere else. And they needed trusted brokers to do that. Now, I don't know the extent to which Lord Farmer worked with the Soviet Union, but according to his own webpage, he had trading relationships with many countries, particularly the Soviet Union. So he did a lot of dealing with the Soviets and with the communists. And so he would have, in my estimation, known what was going on. So he has an understanding of what's happening and what the Soviets, the Russians, the communists are doing. And he has an affinity towards certain projects that the Russians are promoting. So, according to his X account, he supports Israel, but he won't denounce Candace Owens. All right, November 2020, and you know, it's his daughter-in-law. But he won't denounce anything Candace Owens says about Jews, even though he mentions, you know, the horror of World War II and how it hurt a lot of people, to include the Jews. In November 2020, Parler goes heavy MAGA after election 2020. Okay, after everybody thought Trump lost the election, which he didn't, which he did. Trump did lose the election, but Trump was saying he did not lose the election. that he won the election. Okay, well, that's a lie. He lost the election. And just another lawyer was just recently disbarred who defended Trump's false claim. So Parler goes heavy mag after November 2020, spreading this lie about a rigged election. January 6, 2021 is the insurrection. Parler gets deplatformed thereafter by big tech, Apple, Amazon, others, because they say that Parler was responsible for bringing about the insurrection. Guess what? Later in January 2021, according to Reuters, a Russian outfit replatforms Parler. Okay. So in an article by Joseph Min, Kenneth Lee, and Elizabeth Colafor from January 18, 2021, entitled Parler Partially Reappears with Support from Russian Technology Firm. It's reported that Parler, a social media website, an app popular with the American far right, has partially returned online with the help of a Russian-owned technology company. Parler vanished from the internet when dropped by Amazon, etc., after the Capitol situation. The Internet Protocol address it used is owned by DDoS-Guard, which is controlled by two Russian men and provides services, including protection from distributed denial of service attacks. Infrastructure expert Ronald Guillemette told Reuters. So the Internet Protocol address it used is owned by DDoS-Guard, controlled by two Russian men. DDoS-Guard has worked with other racist, rightist, and conspiracy sites. I mean, this is the Russian profile. This is what they do to divide people. They divide hatred. Okay, they want hatred to divide the society. They encourage it. They amplify it. DDoS-Guard has worked with other racist, rightist, and conspiracy sites that have been used by mass murderers to share messages, including 88KUN. It has also supported Russian government sites. DDoS-Guard's website lists an address in Scotland under a company named Cognitive Cloud LP. But that is owned by two men in Rostov-on-Don, Russia, Guillemette said. Parler critics said it was a potential security risk for it to depend on a Russian company, as well as an odd choice for a site popular with self-described patriots. Russian propaganda has stoked political divisions in the United States, supporting outgoing U.S. President Donald Trump and amplifying false narratives about election fraud, but also protests against police brutality. Okay, so what the Russians are doing there is they are amplifying divisions in society, whether it is so-called police brutality or whether it's claims of a rigged election. They play both sides of the fence to get Americans fighting each other. Same thing they're doing in Israel. Okay, that was the guys. So Russia bailed out Parler, and in April of 2021, George Farmer becomes the CEO of Parler. All right, and then about 3 years later, Candace Owens breaks with the Daily Wire. She starts her, anti-Semitic rants. She becomes a traditional Catholic, and she starts her nonstop attacks on America. So what all this shows is the alignment of interests and values with the Russians by a number of people that I've named and others. And if not also the opportunity and the basis of coordination. I believe Candace Owens is a Russian asset. That doesn't mean that she is a Russian agent, but a Russian asset. She can be used, or she is being used, or she is advancing Russian narratives, whether she knows it or not. Though I got to think that, she's got to know it if she's intelligent. But she's advancing their agenda. She's advancing demoralization and division. And so she's advancing hatred. We know that Russia, the communists, the Soviets, have a history of putting plants in the church. We knew that from Bella Dodd. Bella Dodd said in the early 1950s that there were, 1,000 Russian communist agents put into the Catholic Church. And then we also know from the Mitrokhin files, and I haven't spoken much about that. I just finished reading an assessment of that. Mitrokhin files were 25 pages of documents smuggled out of the Soviet Union by a Soviet defector called Mitrokhin. 25,000 pages where he talked about Russian operations and plans and strategies. And one of the things that he wrote about in there, was inserting people in the Catholic Church to divide the Catholic Church. And this was back in the 60s and 70s, late 50s, 60s, and 70s. And some people have criticized Mitrokhin. They say he's not exactly someone you can trust, but people I've talked to say he's actually fairly reliable on a lot of key points. And I got to tell you, I think there are people in the Catholic Church that are dividing the church. And I think the traditional Latin Mass community and the traditional Catholics are an example um, of this division. Um, so we have to condemn uh, anti Semitism. We have to condemn hatred because it blinds us, it divides us, and it's being used against us by our geopolitical enemies. So that we fight each other, so we withdraw from the world. And once we withdraw from the world, it's just going to become these big competing power blocks fighting each other. There's going to be poverty, war, and what you're going to have is you're going to have tyranny, though it's going to come in the name, of traditional values, religion, uh, and ethnicity. So that's how hatred is used. That's how anti-Semitism is used. We have to be aware of it, and we have to understand the Russian strategy here, which is divide us from our allies, to divide us internally. We have to come together. We have to realize we are all friends because we live in the same country, and we're all from different, religions, ethnicities, races, backgrounds, but we have to live and work together. Um, it is absolutely essential, and I will talk more about that in future podcasts. Thank you.